Hello everyone and welcome back to another exciting video. Today Wilson and I are up on Beaver Ridge, our private campsite in our woods, and we're just going to go over a few things. I've had some requests. People have asked questions, want to know how I do some things in relation to our camper, and one of them is how we power our camper off of our PPS or our portable power station. And I just want to say up front that I'm not an electrical expert on these things. I'm not an RV technician or an RV expert. Um, but the camper is not the entire reason that I bought this PPS. It's a very large unit. It's a Bluetti AC200P 2000 watt PPS. It's got a huge inverter in it to run AC loads. It will accept up to 700 watts of solar panel power. I mean, it's a very capable unit, and it's far more than what you would probably need to run a camper of this size. But I use it for my work as well. I'm a oh boy, I'm a contractor, and I've got an enclosed work trailer that I take with me on jobs. I've got a workstation inside with a bench and vise and tools and lights. And there are a lot of times that I wish that I could have power to the trailer. But the thing I'm concerned about is a lot of my customers are elderly. And if I go run an extension cord from one of their power ports or power outlets on the outside of their house to my trailer, then I've got a trip fall hazard with that cord laying out on the ground. So I just don't want the chance of that happening. I would feel awful. Plus, there'd probably be litigation involved in it. So with this, I can take this, have it in the back of my truck. I've got a short cord that goes from this to my trailer. I can power my trailer. Now I've got lights. I got a fan. I've got power for tools. I want to run my grinder. All those things that I can have with power. So camping was part of the reason that I bought it, but it wasn't the entire reason. So I understand if people are reluctant to go out, run out and buy a power station just to take camping, because one, they may not know how to use it and how to really fully benefit from it. And you may be like us and just don't get to camp as much as you want to. If it was me, we'd be camping 300 days a year, but we don't get to. But when we do, this comes with us, unless it's a short trip and we're just going to run off of the house battery, or I call it the travel battery. So let me grab the camera and I'll show you what I did to set this up so that it's a simple plug and play deal for us to run the camper off of this power station. And I'll share with you why I think, it's a good idea to run the camper off the power station versus using the travel battery. So this is our primary setup when we travel. We've got a Group 31 lead acid battery over here. It's a maintenance free. It's not the one that came with the camper. I've upgraded, had this on hand from another project. So I went ahead and put this in the camper. And from the 12-volt battery here, it's just a standard lead acid. It's nothing fancy. It's not an AGM. It's a 100 amp hour battery, so we can draw it down 50% and have 50 amp hour of power to work with. From this, we go to a selector switch right here, and this is just a simple 30 amp 3-position, what they call a toggle switch. And what it allows me to do is switch from the travel battery to the PPS. And that was a very important part of this equation, was I needed a way to make that switch without having to undo wires and rewire things so that you could switch from one to the other. From there, what is simple as this is, there's a power lead that goes from the battery to one side of the switch, and then there's an output line that goes from there to what I call the master power switch, and that is what controls the whole power from either source going to the camper. I had to take a quick break and throw the stick for Wilson. So now we're back. So, in theory, you could run just this switch since it has the off position. I just feel better taking the load off of that switch by having the master switch. This one's rated at like 200 amps, so never an issue with overloading it there on 12-volt side. So I know it looks a little confusing there underneath there, but what it is we've got a single line coming from the center pole of this switch over to our master switch, and that just shuts the power off on the positive side. And then from there, it goes down into the camper and supplies power to your fuse block. We also have an input port over here, which is an Anderson power pole input port, so that this cable from the PPS just plugs right into the side of this box. It's a weather tight connection, so I don't have to worry about that. And from there, it comes over to the other side of this selector switch. So if I shut the camper off and flip this switch all the way to the right, turn my switch back on, now it's as simple as that. We're running off the PPS. Now, generally, when we're camping, the PPS isn't sitting beside the camper like this. They're not a weather tight unit, so I don't want to set it out in the weather. So that cable is long enough that I just run it right into the corner of our ARB room over here, and it sets inside of there. The nice thing about that is it has two high output phone chargers, wireless phone chargers on top. So we just merely set our phone on there, and it's a 15-watt output wireless phone charger. So it charges our phones blazingly fast. So back here in the box, we've got our inputs coming to our switch so we can select those. And the other wires are dealing with the solar charge controller with the panels up on the roof. We've got two 100-watt Bouge RV 9BB panels on top, and they're wired in parallel. And what that means is when you wire something in parallel, you maintain the voltage. So those are both 12-volt panels that output somewhere in the 18 to 20-volt range when they're charging. So that power comes together, and two panels, you're still going to have that same 18 to 20-volt output. Well, that line comes down the spline here and enters into the solar charge controller. And what that does is it breaks it down to about 13.7 to 14 volts, and it sends that power to the battery and maintains the charge on this house or travel battery. It works great. The reason I went with parallel instead of a series connection on the roof is because in low light situations like this, you'll get more charge out of a parallel setup than you would the series connection. So those two panels are in parallel. They come down to the charge controller. Charge controller sends the power to the battery to keep this battery charged. Now I took it one step further because our power station down here will also accept solar power, and it has its own built-in controller. So all I need is the feed from those panels. And what I've done is I've added another Anderson connector right here, and I can disconnect there, plug into a special cable that I made, and I can connect additional panels to that um, PPS through that cable. Now, it is a very simple setup once you break it down. Everything is fused. So all inputs are fused. The solar panel is fused to there. So that, we've got the safety built into it there. We've got this simple cable here that goes over to our ARB room. And then down here on the power station, let's take a look at it, and I'll show you what this one does for us. So the thing about the, there's pros and cons to every unit. I wanted one that had a high output 12-volt port, and this does. It has a 25-volt 12-volt 25 amp output. Let me get that right there. But the thing about this one versus the other one I was considering, which was the Goal Zero 1500X, is this one required a proprietary cable. They use what they call an aviation connector, but you had to get their cable in order to get this output power. And from there, it came to an XT60 connector, which I've got covered up here with shrink wrap, just so it doesn't come apart. And then from there, it broke it down to my Anderson connector that I used, primarily throughout the camper. So I was able to get there, but I had to use their cable. So, and it's proprietary to this unit. I made a mistake and ordered the wrong one first and had to exchange it and get another one. So you got to make sure you get the right cable. Whereas with the Goal Zero that I was considering, it's an Anderson power pole connection right here on the front. So I could just merely plug my cable in that I made right to the unit. So to me, that was one, strike in the negative category for this unit. But I finally settled on this unit because it had the high output 12-volt, and for the money, this had 500 more watts of capacity. So for less money, I got more power, and I gave up a few options that the Goal Zero had. But the Goal Zero is a fine unit, and I will probably end up getting a Goal Zero 1000 to power our sailboat because it's a little bit smaller unit. So this unit, it's large. I mean, you can see right here that it's physically big. It's 60 pounds. So you aren't just going to be picking this up and going to the beach with it because it's not really designed for that. But it has six 20-volt or 20 amp outlets in it. The thing that I really liked about this was I can run my small MIG welder that I carry with me in my trailer everywhere. In my line of work, you never know when you're going to have to repair something or you break a tool and need to fix it. So now I can physically run that welder off of this power station, which is awesome for me. And it's got a full complement of USB ports. We've got USB A's, we've got USB C's. We got the 60-watt output there. We've got the standard 12-volt cigarette lighter plug-in here for 10 amps. I mean, it's very capable. Now, one of the other drawbacks that I've found with this unit is when it comes to the solar charging. So I've got the two panels on the roof. They're 12-volt panels, and they're wired in series, so it's still going to be a 12-volt output, which a maximum voltage of about 18 to 20 volts. Well, the bad thing about this is it's got an initial start voltage for that solar charge of 32 volts. So there's, no real practical way for me to get that with just the rooftop panels. So then I had to build a special cable to go to, I've got two Dokio 120 watts um, solar panels that are foldable. And between those two wired in series, they will charge this. They will exceed that 32 volt kick in start charge. So it will charge that just fine. And then if the camper is sitting somewhere where it's got full sunlight, then my cable will allow me to wire those in series as well for a potential charge of like 640 volts. It will never reach that. We're not on the equator in perfect solar conditions, but 450 to 500 watts is very, realistic number for us if we were in the right conditions. So that would charge us up very quickly. That said, this will run our camper for 4 to 5 days easily with the amount of power that we pull. So we don't have a lot of 12-volt load, but we've got the refrigerator, we've got a Bouge RV 30-quart refrigerator, we've got the Propex heater, we've got all our lights, charging our phones and our tablets and things like that. So I mean, it's a wonderful piece of equipment, and it's very simple to set up to power your camper, with something similar to this. Right now, I think there are only two, maybe three options with this high output 12-volt port, but that's key to do something like this. You can get smaller power stations and use them, in a different fashion. But if you just want to plug directly into your camper and run the 12-volt side off of a power station, I personally feel that you need that high outputted 12-volt plug to go straight to your camper and to make it as simple as what this is. So I know what you're probably thinking right now. That's a whole lot of work just to run your camper off of a PPS. It is, but the great thing about it is you only do it once. So, I wouldn't let it scare you into saying that it's something that you can't do. It's very doable. You just may need to do a little research and pick up a few tools to do it. But it's fun and it's enjoyable because you're getting power free from the sun. Nothing's free. You got to pay up front to get the panels and get the PPS. Now, the one thing I didn't touch on was one of the big factors for us, and primarily for me. Cindy could care less about this aspect of camping. But for me, running the camper off of a PPS versus running off the house battery, the big advantage to running the camper off this PPS is the RPS that's built into this. And that stands for regulated power supply. This unit from start to finish on the battery. It's a 2000-watt battery. I think it's going to let you run it down to about 20%, maybe a little less before it shuts off to protect the battery itself. So that's, 1800 watts of power, give or take, that you're going to get out of this battery, far more than you're going to get out of your house battery. But the beauty about this is that on this battery, with that regulated power supply, it is going to be a flat, constant 13.4 to 13.7 volt output for the whole run of that battery. Whereas with your house battery, as your voltage of the battery drops, so does the voltage going to your appliances that you're running off of it. And that may not seem like a big deal, but your refrigerator will thank you, with years of service by running it off of a regulated power source versus running it off a standard battery. Will it run off a standard battery? Sure. But as that voltage continues to drop, it continues to put more and more load on those running circuits in those appliances, like your heater and your refrigerator. So having that regulated power source to me was so critical, especially on the 12-volt side. It's got a pure sine wave inverter on the AC side, so you can run anything off of that. But to have that regulated power source, that is just so important. And I hear people talk about running their 12-volt lead acid batteries down to like 10%. Yeah, you can do that, but it's going to be putting out like maybe 8, 9 volts max. Whereas this, you run it all the way down and up to the point where it turns itself off due to low voltage, it is still outputting that same flat 13.4 to 13.7 volts. So that is something that is to really take into consideration. And I just put this video out here so that people that were asking could see how I've got our setup done. And maybe this spurs a little thought on your side as to, hey, maybe this is something we ought to look into. There are so many options out there. There aren't many out there with this high output 12-volt plug. So like I said, two, maybe three, and I just can't think of that third one right now. If I do, I'll put it in the description. But if you're going to do something similar and plug in, Goal Zero makes a couple with this plug. Bluetti makes a couple different models with a high output plug. So, take a look at those and see if that might work for you. There are other ways to run portable power stations, for your 12-volt needs as well. This is just how we did ours. So thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, just drop us a question there in the comments and we'll get back with you. So thank you very much and we'll see you on the next video. We done? Yeah.